let's go ahead and get started. Let's see. So I actually, the little internal editor in me sort of spoke up in my head when Aileen was introducing, because talking about the early internet, but the internet doesn't really begin with the World Wide Web. Dinosaur Comics got started in 2003. The web famously began about 1990, Christmas 1990, when Tim Berners-Lee released the first browser, World Wide Web, to what was then Usenet, I think it was. So this is 12 years after that, but that's still longer than 12 years ago. So that still counts as early web, I think, from our standpoint. So to begin with, what was your first exposure to the internet? How did you get find out about all this and get interested in doing things online?
Yeah, that's a good question. Before I answer it, everyone's wondering why I appear to be in a car. It's because I am literally in a car. The internet went out of my house and there's a storm. And so I drove out into the storm to a place where there was really good signal for my phone, because this is my commitment to MetaFilter. To answer your question, I think I signed up for the National Capital Freenet in Ottawa, which was part of Carleton University that gave text-based access to the internet. So largely like news groups. I remember going to the Star Trek news group a lot. But that, I think, was my first exposure to it. And then, of course, you have the web coming after that. And I couldn't tell you what my first website was. It was probably something like yahoo.com.
Yeah, hold on a second. Yeah, for me at least, you cut out. Did you hear him cut out more? Oh wait, I think it's just my internet connection. See, that's unstable. Keep going. It's all getting recorded in the cloud. So.
Yeah, I mean I was pretty much done. Freenet, text-based news groups. Dinosaur Comics is old enough that when it started in 2003, I did post a news group saying, "Hey, I've got a new comic. Everyone check it out." So. Yeah. Sometimes when people ask me, how do you get started with a webcomic? I'm like, my advice is 20 years out of date. You should not listen to me.
Yeah, I miss the news group days somewhat. News groups are still around, so I understand that a lot of people just use them for piracy now, which is kind of sad.
I have nothing to do with piracy or air piracy, for that matter.
Let's see. So let me go on to my topic. Okay, so that segues into how Dinosaur Comics got started. You posted it on Usenet. Did you publish? Did you submit it to Yahoo back when they had their vaunted directory? That
shoot, I might have. I remember submitting a different site to Yahoo. What I did was I was going to Carleton University in undergrad at the time. And so I made these cutout cardboard dinosaurs with the URL on them, but quants.com is hard to say, hard to spell. So I also registered the very catchy URL of poo.ca. And in 2003, people would visit websites they saw on a piece of paper stuck to a wall. Don't usually do anymore. And so I took advantage of my extreme height and ran around and put these posters up, these little cardboard dinosaurs up, throughout Carleton University, and that gave me my initial seed of an audience.
That is incredibly charming. I don't suppose you have any of those dinosaur cutouts left. I guess it's kind of too long for you to expect that some of them might survive.
Actually, I went back a couple of years ago, and all the cutouts were gone. There was one I put up really high by jumping, and it remained for a long time, long enough that now that it's gone, it's left a shadow in the wall behind it, because that wall has faded less in the sun than anywhere else around it. So I have truly left my mark on Carleton University through some light vandalism.
So when Dinosaur, what was the sort of growth curve of Dinosaur Comic? What did it look like? How quickly did it grow in popularity?
Yeah, this was a time where web stats were less of a thing. The internet
Yeah.
seemed more flat, right? And so
Yeah.
there wasn't a huge gulf between a professional website and an amateur website. So I was just pleased that people were visiting, that I saw people talking about it on campus. I do remember, I think it was 2004, maybe 2005. I was looking at stats then, and there was a big jump in September of that year. I'm not sure which student on which campus was spreading the word, but someone, like literally word of mouth or email or whatever, had an impact and got me more people than I had seen before that stuck around, which was great. But it was, you know, a very slow and organic way of building an audience.
Yes. Yeah, that segues pretty well into asking about what the web looks like then, sort of compared to how it is now. How it's changed? Now it seems like it's mostly social media and video.
Yeah. You know, there's that joke of the websites are just, there's 5 websites full of screenshots, the other 4. And, you know, I do miss the web as being this place where you weren't sure what you were going to see next. And
Yeah.
you could make a website that's just the same pictures, the same 6 pictures with different words. And that could be enough to attract an audience. It was more experimental for sure. And I do miss that people don't really visit as websites in the way they used to, right? Like you have a constant drip of usually social media or it's some other algorithmic feed. And there's less of going out and exploring. And that has advantages too. Like I used to get really bored and just type in random URLs and see what was there. I remember purple.com showed a purple web page with something like, what were you expecting? And I was like, this is what I wanted. Great, thank you. But people, there's less of that these days. It's more easy to be entertained for sure. And that changes the stuff you see, right? Like I don't know, it's a long answer to a simple question, but like I pull my hair out at the word content because it's such a corporate way of viewing anything, to be like, this is something that fills, this is something fungible that fills the vessel. I think social media has changed a lot of the way art is produced, because now when it's on a system where people sharing it gets you attention, you have stuff obviously designed to be shared. And that's interesting. And also it's like very different from what Dinosaur Comics was and is, which was almost aggressively anti-reader in the sense you had to read 2 of them to get the sense of the joke, because the pictures don't change. And you don't get that sharing a single image.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Long answer. Sorry about that.
No, that's great. That was a perfect answer, I think. Yeah. So how is Dinosaur Comics holding up? I mean, was it like, yeah, it just turned 20 years old. I mean, I
20
remember
years
doing
old, yeah.
a MetaFilter post about it, and I remember there was like a code that, or a cipher you put into an early, or not early, but some time ago, that is yet to be deciphered.
Yes, I really thought it would. I did a comic about this cipher that I think it was the 1800s. Scientists who wanted to lay claim to something they thought they'd proven but couldn't actually prove yet or hadn't published would just write a letter in the paper with this cipher in it that was designed to be impossible to crack. But then once you said someone else claimed your idea, you say, no, I got there first because this cipher that says, you know, there's 5 letters A and 2 letters B and all this thing, it spells out this message that says I discovered this first. And so that was fun. I did a Dinosaur comic about it, and I put in this cipher as a punchline, thinking this will be broken really quick. And then over the next week, it was not broken. Over the next month, people started developing tools trying to break it, and I offered a prize, and they kept enhancing the prize. And then eventually, like, it wasn't broken, and I thought, you know, this is an opportunity to take a secret to my grave, which I feel like is something I'm big into. So with 20th anniversary, I gave one more clue. So people have gotten close. They haven't gotten it yet. And I'm torn between taking this secret to my grave or like putting a thing in my will that says, in the event of my death, please tell people the answer is blank.
Yeah. I personally am terrified of taking things to my grave like that. You know, I
Oh,
to
you
make
gotta take
sure.
a secret to your grave. I'm not talking
Oh,
about like important knowledge. Like, don't take the secret to what was that? The quick fire, the Roman Greek quick fire. Anyway, this is just
yeah,
a little joke I'm taking to my grave.
yeah. Just thinking we are so many things that we'll never be able to communicate to people that, you know,
Add one to the
dying
pile.
with things. Yeah. It's just, anyway. So why do you think that you've managed to keep this going for so long? I mean, not just as far as remaining popular, but how do you keep your own interest up?
That's a good question. It helps that I never really face a blank sheet of paper, right? Like I know every comic is going to have T-Rex in it. I know he's going to be talking about something. And so it helps to have that to bounce off of. It also helps that it is so open. T-Rex can talk about anything. I can do comics exploring, the nature of the medium, or I can do stuff involving just the relationships between the characters, or I can do something cool I learned or something I'd like to learn. So its flexibility has kept it interesting for me. And also helps that it is something that I can do and still have time left in the day. It
Yeah.
takes a long time to write, but it doesn't take a long time to draw, obviously. And so it's let me do other things like, publish a choose your own path version of Shakespeare or write comics for Marvel or all this other stuff that I couldn't necessarily do if it was a larger part of my day. So I've been lucky enough to have this sweet spot between that. It's interesting, people like it too, and it doesn't use up 100% of my resources.
Very good. Yes. I look at the internet, the web. I should be precise with my terms here. Everyone these days seems to conflate the World Wide Web with the internet, which is something that people were a lot more careful about, I think, some time ago. But when I look at all the sites that have come and gone, like there were big sites, there were huge sites that everyone thought, oh, this will be around forever, and then they died relatively quickly. The ultimate early example of this, of course, is suck.com, which was one of the
That's
first
a name I
really,
haven't heard in many a moon. Yes.
yeah, not a lot of people have. And co-creator is still around on Twitter. He also founded plastic.com, which was actually the web sort of forum site I went to before I got my MetaFilter account back in the days when it wasn't generally open, or at least hadn't been for a while. So yeah, Suck vanished, and it's hard to even. I think there are still archives of it out there. I've heard that there's someone who has a site that repeats the posts that Suck posted, like some number of years after the fact. I don't know where it is though. It's hard to find things like that. And let's see, what are some other sites like that? Oh, this is difficult to think right now. I'm not really the focus of this anyway. Can you think of any sites that you used to go to and enjoy and love, and then they shut down, and now all that's left of them is like a ghost on the Wayback Machine, if that? Can you think of any?
Yeah. I mean, there's comics of that, web comics I've loved, and at the very start, 2003, 2004, 2005, there was this big conflict between print and web comics, where web comics were like, we're the future, old man, and print comics were like, you're nothing but glorified T-shirt salespeople, you're not real cartoonists, blah blah blah. And one of the things we had that we would lord over them is like, well, our comics are fireproof. Like, your books can burn, but ours will live forever. And that's not the case, because data rots, bits decay. And there's comics I love, like Pictures for Sad Children, that are no longer online. There's a couple books that are actually the way that it was the most preserved by the books that were published. But the webcomic itself, the website's gone. And it's crazy to see that in your own life, where something you think is so long lasting and so important to you could be so ephemeral and disappear so quickly just by someone not paying a bill and it goes away. And there's great resources like Internet Archive that fight against that, but it's still crazy to think that we're so ephemeral.
Yeah.
20 years of dinosaur comics can go away the second I stop paying that hosting bill. And some will survive, most won't.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really saddening. I remember some things about webcomics back then. I searched around. I encountered a couple of times long ago a webcomic called Stupid Pigeon, spelled Stoopid pigeon. And it was pretty good. It was a little. It had that sort of bro sort of aesthetic to it. I remember. And sometimes I try looking for information on it, and it's very obscure now. I don't think it was ever really popular, but it was still professionally done. And I found out that there was a print archive of it. Someone did release a book, at least a compilation. But that I found it out from a long ago forum comment. I think someone actually posted a review of it. And I think that's about the only remaining record that this thing existed across the web. That's all I found so far. Yeah, another
Bleak.
site. Huh?
I say it's bleak.
Yeah, it is. It is. There was once a really popular webcomic called Elf Life by a guy named Carson Fire. I just remembered this recently. And it was fairly popular for its circle, but it's completely gone now. I think Carson had some medical issues, and he mentioned he had to fire. I've never heard from him, so I guess the medical issues didn't turn out well. Oh, this is certainly a cheering angle, a direction. The conversation has gone, hasn't it? Oh, well,
John, we do have some questions in chat if you would like.
Let's do some questions now, then we'll continue on when talking about Project Wonderful. Let's see. Would you like to read the questions after you've been tracking them?
Sure. I'll just start with the first one that has not been answered. So it says, Mr. North, I'd love to know about your first memory of MetaFilter, if you can recall it. That's from Reese.
Oh gosh, MetaFilter, to my mind, was there from the beginning. I don't remember my first experience. I can tell you that in 2008, I went to an early internet convention called RaffleCon, and RaffleCon, yeah, and one of the founders of MetaFilter was there, and I was like, I should go introduce myself. And so I was wearing a Dinosaur Comics. No, he was wearing a Dinosaur Comics shirt. And so I thought I'm gonna be super smooth. And I walked up and said, hey man, I like your shirt. And he looked at me and said, oh, thanks. And then I realized I was being awkward and weird and walked away. Because I was like, I never said who I was. I just walked up and said, I like your shirt, and then walked away. And felt embarrassed about this for years. And then we reconnected on Twitter, I think last year. And I was like, man, I gotta apologize for that. And he's like, no, I gotta apologize because I realized it was you like 10 minutes after you left, and I felt bad about it for 10 years. So my secret skill is to walk up to a complete stranger and make us both feel bad about something for a decade in the space of like 10 words. And that, I think, is my best MetaFilter memory.
Oh, that's great. Was that Matt Howie? I mean, he was the main founder. Anyway.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyway, another question.
Oh,
we're going to be talking about Project Wonderful soon.
Yeah, this is actually a question about Project Wonderful, so it's a nice
Smooth
coincidence.
Segue.
It's from Romy. What was your experience like running the ad platform Project Wonderful, and how you see the indie web faring in the modern web economy?
Yeah, great question. So Project Wonderful was an ad network that I built initially for webcomics. Became like a network for all sorts of indie things. And the big idea there was like, man, online advertising sucks a lot. Let's make it a version of it that doesn't suck. So let's not do all this click fraud and all this tracking. Let's just like put images that you can click on, publishers will be in charge of what shows up. It'll be small, it'll be community based, and it worked really well. And it worked really well until, like I say, people stopped visiting websites as much. You would, Facebook wants you to stay on Facebook. Everything tries to stay in these walled gardens, and it became harder and harder to be able to sustain our publishers in the way that it did. It lasted 12 years, and it was a crazy 12 years because when you're running an ad network, all that traffic goes to your servers for you to serve an ad. It has to be really, really fast. People don't get mad at the ads. And I wrote the whole thing from scratch. I ran the servers from scratch. I was a full stack dev for this one project, doing real-time dynamic content across thousands of sites, millions of hits a day. I don't talk about it much because normally people aren't that interested, but I think it was really cool. It was really neat from a technical perspective that this was built. It was neat from a personal perspective that I got to keep it running. When it did shut down, I tell you, I did not miss being on call 24 hours. And I gave myself this wacky form of PTSD where if anything went wrong, I would get an alert, a text alert to my phone that would play the Star Trek red alert noise. And I didn't realize what had happened until I was listening to a Star Trek podcast that played the red alert noise to block out a swear word. And instantly my blood ran cold and I could feel myself being stressed out. And I was like, oh my God, that noise, which used to be a fun computery sci-fi noise, now reminds me of being woken up at 4 a.m. because the database stopped replicating and I need to fix it. So I guess I'm ending the story of Project Wonderful by how it gave me sound effects PTSD. But I really like that we got to help so many people. And I like meeting people at conventions who are like, yeah, this gave me rent money. This gave me food money when other things wouldn't. And it breaks my heart that it is so hard to do that these days.
Yeah, we had a couple of us over on MetaFilter are trying to think about doing an ad network ourselves. We talked about this over email. And we're still sort of trying to get a grasp of how to kind of get it started. Actually, I think the person who's mostly working on it is in the chat now. Hi, Sparks. Let's see. I don't suppose you have any of that code lying around, do you?
I have it all. I've kept it all. I mean, it's 12 years of my life, right? And it was crazy in that by the end, when I'd be adding a new feature, you always have this sense of like, who wrote this code? And it was you from a decade ago, and you could not blame no one but yourself.
Yeah. In any case, one of the reasons that we're trying to sort of consider doing this is, more from the sort of other end, to sort of make the web. We're kind of thinking, I'm thinking of sort of ad as sort of almost like a service. Like this is another avenue by which you can find interesting websites.
Yeah. And I mean, that's how it functioned. Anyone could click on the URL here to put their ad up there. And so it felt like you were communicating with the community of the people reading that website. It felt like other cartoonists would put ads on your site in this sort of like friendly tip sort of way. It really made the websites feel small and connected in a way you don't normally expect an ad to do. Normally you think an ad is Coke interrupting your movie to say, go buy Coke. But this felt more like people hanging out, which is, again, weird for an ad. I think a lot of people initially like, what is Ryan doing making an ad network? That doesn't seem like the kind of thing he's interested in. But I want it to be like, the idea of recommending yourself to people doesn't have to be horrible. It's when you start throwing like all the tracking and all the fraud and everything else on top of it that becomes horrible. But the core idea is there's nothing wrong with it. You do it respectfully, I think.
I just noticed that. Anyway, my picture on the screen, I make you look kind of vaguely frog-like with the. I just want to assure everyone that I'm not a frog.
I did put another question in the chat about, how possible do you think it is to start an ad network now, like Project Wonderful in 2023, since MetaFilter is considering that?
Yeah, I think MetaFilter is in a unique place because they don't necessarily have to do a network. You just do it for yourselves and let your readers support you, which is part of what Project Wonderful was doing. In the network sense, it is hard because of that people don't visit websites idea. where a lot of traffic gets shifted off the websites through preloading, through sharing. And it's also like very hard to build an audience on something like social media where you're only as good as your last post that went viral. And the whole network is designed to show me something interesting, not show me something from that guy I liked last week. You know, it's tricky. If I had the answer, I would not have had to shut down Project Wonderful.
Well, we're sort of segueing to social media. So let's talk a bit about that. With Twitter, of course, is one of the big sites that people would find things through. And now Twitter has, well, it's taken a detour down into the crapper. And it feels to me almost like Elon Musk is trying to kill the site by whatever means he can. That's still technically defensible, I guess, in a fiduciary way, although since he's the main owner now. Although I think there are banks that have also gone with him on it. So maybe, I don't know. It doesn't feel like he's trying to trash the site. What do you think? I mean, it looks like Twitter might not be a good place for things to go viral in the near future. What do you think about things like alternatives like Mastodon or Co-host or Post, I guess? There's also Project Mushroom and Hive. And
yeah,
I don't know.
I've signed up for most or all of those, but I haven't posted there. And part of the reason is I have this sense of like, do I want to do this again?
Yeah.
I mean, the thing I've been grappling with over the past 10 years, 20 years really, is that 20 years ago, I was someone who believed that the internet was an intrinsic good. This is something that spreads good throughout the world by the very nature of its existence. We're lowering barriers to communication. We're making it cheaper for you to talk to anyone around the world. All of these are innately good. And what I didn't realize, and what a lot of us didn't realize, is there's downsides to that. Like if you're marginalized in any way, you now are open to harassment from almost the whole world effectively for free. If you've messed up online at all, what always gets spread around is the mistake you made, not the apology you made afterwards to correct that mistake. There's ways that this can be weaponized that are bad. And there's all this stuff that comes with technology that I don't think we recognize the downsides at the time. And that's something, I struggle with because I was on the wrong side of that. I thought that the internet is great and people were either going to get online or be left behind and get with the program. And that was a world in which the internet was a thing you dialed into for a couple hours a day and then left behind you. And now it's almost mandatory and you can't leave it behind you. Stuff that happens online does affect your real life. And I realize I've forgotten what your question is. I've switched into a rant about technology.
Social media.
Twitter. Yes. So all this is to say,
yeah. By the way, feel free to rant.
Other social media sites.
We're going quickly.
Yes.
So we're
look at these other social media sites. I feel like I'm not sure I want to sign up for that again, because in 2023, I would not sign up to Twitter. I would not say, oh boy, I can't wait to be on Elon Musk's private social network. That's embarrassing. But I'm on there. I've got momentum that carries me through. But I have some friends who have just sort of disconnected, gone offline. They don't post online on social media at all. And
that's sad, yeah.
At a time, I like 20 years ago, I thought that's crazy. Why would you want to do that? Now I'm like, I see why you have been driven off, and I don't like that I'm participating in the systems that cause that to happen. So it's all due for some evaluation that I have yet to do, but it's just stopped me from signing up for new social networks. That's the real talk.
Yeah, well, if you want to throw out any of your social media things and pick up some easy followers, feel free to go right ahead. Yeah.
You can find me on Twitter for as long as it lasts at Ryan Q North.
Yeah, if you ever try it again on Mastodon, let me know. I'll be your first follower.
Thank you.
Let's see. So, all right, let's do some more questions from the audience while I look through my notes here.
Remy has a question. You're best known as an artist, but actually got started in computational linguistics. What
Mhm.
insights has this unique background given you in the rise of stuff like AI chatbots and image generators?
Oh boy. I'll tell you a story. In 1996 in Ottawa, there was a story in the news about a family being harassed by computer hackers. And what these computer hackers were doing is they were turning the lights on and off in the house. They were interrupting their phone calls. They were just messing remotely with this family. And the Ottawa police are like, we're taking this very seriously. We're talking to the telecom company, Bell Canada. We're getting to the bottom of this. And me and my friends who were, 16, 17, very online, knew this was baloney, right? Like you cannot do that. You can do it now with smart switches, but at the time, like this was impossible. You can't hack your way into turning the lights on and off over dial-up or DSL. You're not interrupting a analog phone call with a computer. Like that just doesn't make any sense. And the family was like, yeah, we don't know what we did to earn the ire of these wild and capricious hackers, but they're certainly awful people, and we only hope they don't target our 14-year-old son. And then a week later, the story obviously comes out that, oh yeah, it was the son. He was using three-way switches in the house to mess with the lights, or like picking up the phone on the other extension going, I am a hacker. And just like stuff like that. Like it was obviously baloney. But people at that time didn't have a lot of experience with computers. And their main experience was through movies and TV shows where hackers could do that, where hackers were these capricious gods who could change things with their thoughts, who would, make your computer download all of Encyclopedia Britannica, which would cause it to catch on fire, and stuff that in like 20 years later, even 10 years later, was clearly ridiculous and embarrassing. But people didn't know it. They just knew through the closest metaphor they had, which was movies and fiction. And I feel like we're in a moment there now with AI where like every couple weeks it feels you see a new article where someone's saying, I fed this AI my dead girlfriend's diaries and I feel like she's back. And the computer is alive. What hath we wrought? And if you dig deep, there's always a section where they're like, yeah, I ignored the parts that were non sequiturs and I cut all the parts that didn't make any sense. And what I'm left with is this chatbot telling me it's alive in a way that a chatbot from fiction would, just like in the data it's been trained on. And it's the same sort of moment where I feel like in 20 years, we'll all be like, yeah, obviously that's ridiculous. No one would ever believe that now. But at the time, our closest metaphor for what an AI is, because we call them AI instead of just like language generation machines, is that it is this self-aware, striving to be free Terminator sort of thing. So I guess what I'm saying is I hope that the general public will learn more about how these things actually work, because they're fascinating. Like the computational linguistics behind it is really neat. There's some really cool technology here, but it does no one a service to oversell it and say, this is alive, this is striving to be free, we have cured death by uploading your dead girlfriend's diaries, now you can chat with her again. All that stuff is the same thing as, Sami, the hacker's name was Sami the hacker in 1996. That's my hot take. My CL-based hot take.
The thing about some of these models, I mean, in a way, they're a lot more complicated than simple Markov chains, but they are
obviously
of the same category as simple Markov chains.
I mean, it's a frustrating thing. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you can keep going. You can keep going. I'm not.
It's the frustrating thing with the discourse around this is you can say like, okay, so what these machines are doing is different than what a human mind would be doing. And then someone says, well, how do you know? Are you simply a machine that generates language? And you're just reduced to these metaphorical arguments that go in circles because people don't understand the way that this technology actually works. And I'm not the first to make the comparison of like, we invent photography, we invent and steam engines, we invent every new technology, and then there's this question of, well, is the mind a steam engine? Is the mind a computer? It's all metaphor, which can be valuable, but like there's actual mathematics of how these things work. Well, there's no mystery there. We can answer these questions. They're not black boxes.
And it's only a matter of time. Someone in Hollywood right now is writing a horror screenplay that'll go direct to DVD about a chat GPT chatbot that tries to take over the world, and only the dashing, handsome young computer hacker can stop it. It's these are on the shelf at Walmart like every week. I see them there. It's being written now. In any case, let's do another couple of audience questions, then we'll start talking about your other comics and your books.
Sure.
So Arthur has a question. You've written several branching narratives, aka choose your own adventures. Are you likely to explore that more?
That's a good question, and I call them choose your own path stories because Choose Your Adventures is a trademark owned by a not unlitigious company, so I avoid it. But yeah, I did a Choose Your Adventure, pardon me, Choose Your Own Path version of Shakespeare, To Be or Not to Be, did Hamlet, and then did a sequel, Romeo and or Juliet. And the thing that I loved about those stories was that by adapting Shakespeare, it gave me a spine. I tried to write a Choose Your Own Path nonlinear story beforehand, and I got stuck because the story can go anywhere. And I was like, well, what am I doing here? And it helped to have the spine of Shakespeare. And it helped to realize that you're not actually going anywhere. You're still creating a story space. And Choose Your Own Path books are based on a lie that says you choose what happens next. And the truth is you don't. You choose from what I've already chosen to happen next. I give you a choice, but they're all the ones that I've decided. And once I realized that I'm actually constructing a meta narrative, a story space that players can go through in their own way, that made it click for me, because now you're back in the realm of fiction, right? You have rules of what is the story about? What do I want to say? What does it mean? And all those questions can be answered in a classical narrative, and they can be answered in a nonlinear narrative. They're the exact same thing, except now you've got a story space. So to answer the question, I would like to do more there, and I actually have done more there, but the project hasn't been announced yet and probably won't until next year. So there is something new and exciting, but that's all I can say. And also it's nonlinear.
Yay.
Yay. This is the first I think I've spoken of this project, so that's the big scoop.
Yeah, thank you. Another question?
Yes, so there's another question in chat by Reese. Which of your many projects lately has brought you the most joy?
Oh, what a good question. This is going to sound like a fake answer because it's about a book that's coming out next week, but it's true. Erica Henderson and I reunited after Squirrel Girl to write our own story, and it's called Danger and Other Unknown Risks. Comes out next week. And unlike in Squirrel Girl, where I wrote the script and Erica drew it, we like collaborated, we had back and forth, she would change things. But in this book, this Danger and Other Unknown Risks book, we collaborated in a super unusual way that was built on the trust and respect we had for each other, where I wrote a script and then she revised it and like struck whole chapters. We changed characters, sent it back to me. I would revise hers, maybe bring a character back. We went back and forth. There were 20 drafts of this. And that is a crazy way to write a book, because if you don't trust the person you're working with, you would get really annoyed at them continually messing up your book, changing your stories, changing your words. But by trusting them, it became this really unique, almost intimate collaborative experience where you really trust the other person you're building this story with. And you know, I'm 42 years old, and it's a joy to discover a new way to make something with someone that you've already been working with before. And I think the book is really special because of that, because we did go through these 20 drafts. We know all the different ways the story could have gone, And so this fantasy world that it takes place in, it feels a lot more lived in because we have lived there in different drafts where they zigged instead of zagged. We know where that story would have went, which I'm realizing now is kind of like a choose your own path book, except we collapsed it down into one narrative. So we gave you the best path through the book, and we explored all the other options in the narrative space and pruned the decision tree that way. That's really interesting. I hadn't thought of that way before.
Do any of the previous drafts survive? I mean, do you have like footnotes or endnotes mentioning, well, we had decided to do this, but it got left out?
Not in the text itself, but they're there as almost echoes, right? Where when I guess I talk about like making the world feel lived in, where questions that you wouldn't necessarily have to answer in a straight narrative, we've already answered by exploring it that way. And so we can just gesture towards what those answers are as background details. And the final book, I think, is stronger because of that. Feels like an actual place and not just a set of, sound stages to make this story happen.
Let's start talking now about your comics work, your print comics work, particularly Unbeatable Squirrel Girl, which I think is very popular. I've got a few issues, and it's always a joy to read. It's just great. I find, at least. How did you get into that gig to begin with?
So this comes back to dinosaur comics. People ask, like, how did you break into print comics? How do you get a job at Marvel? And like, my answer is bad. It's slow. I wrote dinosaur comics for 10 years, at which point one of my readers aged enough that she graduated and got a job at a comic book company. That was Shannon Waters at Boom, who hired me to write Adventure Time comics because she was like, let's ask the dinosaur comics guy if he can write something. And I said, sure. And then my editor on Squirrel Girl, Will Moss, read the Adventure Time comics, said, oh, this guy's pretty neat. I wonder if he wants to write Squirrel Girl. And so there's this chain of events that leads back to February 1st, 2003, with me putting up this first dinosaur comic on the web. So if you do ever gain access to a time machine, that is my temporal weak spot. You distract me on that day, whole future changes.
What about what it was like playing around in the gigantic Marvel sandbox? And what is Squirrel Girl strong continuity among all that, or only in itself?
Yeah, no, it's there in the 616. Continuity is a strange beast because there are 80 years of Marvel comics, and they all are technically in continuity. But the reality is the stories that we all love are the ones we remember. The stories we all hated are the ones that get silently sort of shuffled off to the side. So it's kind of flexible. And when you're writing in a shared universe, there's pluses and minuses. Pluses are you have these great characters ready to go. Minuses are you're in this sandbox that everyone else is playing in at the same time. And so there was an example where Squirrel Girl, I wanted to have her go team up with Doctor Strange. And I got a note from my editor that said, oh, just by the way, so when this book comes out, Doctor Strange isn't going to be Dr. Stephen Strange, but it's going to be Loki for a couple of months. And I was like, that's great. I'm going to put Loki in the story. That works out super well. And there's the other side of that where I want to put Captain America in a story. And my editor said, oh, just so you know, by the time this book comes out, Steve Rogers will have had the super soldier serum sucked out of him, so he's an old man with no powers. And I had Doreen beating up Captain America, and I was like, well, it kind of feels bad to have her beat up an old man with no powers. And then my editor's editor hopped in and was like, oh, actually, well, Steve Rogers, even without the super soldier serum, he's still a trained military man with great physical peak and all this stuff. And it's like, okay, so she'll beat him up. And that's what she did. She beat up Steve Rogers with no powers. And the downside of that in a shared universe is you normally have to explain it, right? You have to explain in your story if Steve Rogers shows up looking like an old man, why he doesn't look like the normal Captain America. Because readers who only read your book and don't read Captain America will be confused. But Squirrel Girl had this great thing with the jokes in the margin under the page, which I just lifted from Dinosaur Comics for the alt text. And that gave me a place to just sort of turn to the reader directly and say, here's what's going on. And just a little bit of plot scaffolding to settle that. And similarly in Squirrel Girl, we had these Deadpool cards that explained, she used to read about who her enemies were, what their origins were, what their powers were. But I realized after one issue, this is a great way to get backstory across, because I can just, in one panel, be like, here's this guy's deal, here's what he wants, here's his weaknesses, done. And it doesn't feel like you're stopping the narrative to have someone be like, as you know, Professor, Craven the Hunter had some weird herbs that gave him these powers, and he craves hunting and blah, 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 blah. So stuff that began as jokes ended up being really useful comics tools to make the book accessible. Because the whole big deal of it was, let's make a book that everyone can enjoy and don't need to know 80 years of Marvel history to enjoy it, to read it, which is a clever trick because I didn't know 80 years of Marvel history. So I pitched the book that I could write.
Yeah, I remember. Oh, there are all sorts of great moments in the Squirrel Girl comics. Remember correctly, there was one I think where correct me if I'm wrong, that Galactus was on an online dating site. Did that happen?
Yes, there was a backup 2 pages where there was an online dating site, and I believe Galactus was involved. Maybe I'm crazy. Yes, I'm gonna say yes.
I've been thinking of something else. But oh, there are just so many great moments in there. I mean, it feels like there should be like a Squirreliverse that's just where it's just free to do whatever it wanted. I mean, doesn't Deadpool already kind of do this? I don't know.
Well,
Honestly,
there's a Squirrel
I
Girl
will,
omnibus that came out last week. So all the comics have been collected in a 1,616 page book. It's a brick. You could kill someone with it. And I'm really pleased to have it out there.
is there any particular genius moment that you wrote for Squirrel Girl?
That's the kind of question I like. I will say, and if you haven't read the book, I don't want to spoil too much, but in the first arc, she goes up against Galactus. And maybe a year later, I had an idea of how I could bring Galactus back for the finale whenever we got to it. That would be sweet. And it would sort of pay off and put a nice bow on everything. And I'm really proud of the fact that we could bring it in for that landing and use that scene, 5 years later, in a way that felt natural. And it helped to have that in my back pocket, knowing that this is the ending that I eventually want to reach. Helped writing it along the way, because superheroes don't normally get endings. Like, they're always in the second act. Their origin happens, then they have their middle act where they're fighting crime, and they never get the third act of the conclusion, because these characters are always going to be fighting crime, saving the day. But we managed to give Doreen not necessarily an ending, but at least a little capstone on our version of the character that felt like, I'd raised her, and now I'm sending her off to school, and I got to see her on her first day of school and hope that I gave her everything she needed to survive and thrive there. And so that, I think, is something I'm proud of, that we could take this monthly superhero book about a girl who talks to squirrels and fights crime and make it mean something and make it feel like a cohesive 5-year narrative that could live as this giant omnibus.
That's good. That's nice. Yeah. How about I hadn't heard about it before reading it in your bio, but you have a graphic novel based on Slaughterhouse-Five?
Yeah. This is the first graphic novel based on any of Kurt Vonnegut's work, and absolutely terrifying because you don't want to be the guy who screws up Vonnegut, right? Like, this is one of my favorite books already, and the first thing I said when I sort of thought of this project was, we have to make it feel like it belongs as a graphic novel. Like, it can't just be, here's the book, we photocopied it and added some pictures, because there's no point to read that. So what I pictured in my head was, I was an editor and I'd hired Kurt Vonnegut to write this comic, and he gave me this prose novel, and I'm like, Kurt, this is not this is not what we need. Now my job is to turn your prose novel into a graphic novel and try to make it feel like it lived there, like it was born there originally. So at the end of reading this comic, you don't say, oh wow, what a great adaptation of a prose novel. You say, oh wow, what a great comic. Like, that was really cool. So the book itself has all these sort of, I call them comic tricks, things that you can only do in comics, make it feel like this is where the story was born, this is where the story lives. And I talk about it normally with my books, with my work. I'm Canadian, I'm modest, I don't really praise them that much, but with this book, it feels like I only had like one hand on the wheel, because Vonnegut wrote the prose novel, Albert Montes did the art, I just wrote the script. And so I can point to be like, isn't this cool? This is a really neat book. This Eisner nominated work is really neat. And I don't feel like I'm talking about myself. I feel like I'm talking about Kurt and Albert. So it's a special book, and I think it's a really fun book.
This is an aside. I think it may have been his last public appearance or something, but Kurt Vonnegut was on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart shortly
Really?
before he died. Yeah, I don't know. It used to be that all of the Daily Show episodes could be viewed on the site online, but when Jon Stewart left, they really slacked off in that. So I don't even know if that's possible anymore. If it's still out there, I mean, he is extremely old when they did it. But it was nice to see, especially since John was such a fan of him.
I think we all are.
Yeah. It's a very sad.
And that was the fun of the book, is that when you read Kurt Vonnegut, you get what I call Kurt Vonnegut disease, where you want to write like him. And you can't, because that's his voice. You can't do that. But in the graphic novel, like one time in my life I could lean into it. And there were a couple places in the book where Kurt does this trick in prose that works like gangbusters, where instead of telling you what people say, he tells you the gist of it. He talks around it and gives you what you should feel, but not the actual words. And so in comics, that doesn't work the same way. It doesn't feel as satisfying to have a narration box being like, here's the gist of what they're saying. And there's different tricks I used to get around them. There were a couple places where I had to actually fill in some of this dialogue. And so I got to invent dialogue in Vonnegut's voice. And I did read one review that was like, it's interesting that Ryan North made the choice not to change any words or add any words. And I was like, I got you. I did add words. You just couldn't tell because I passed as Vonnegut.
Let's see. Well, are there any, let's see, what else? We're approaching 8. Let's go ahead and go to other questions that are from the chat.
Should we still maybe talk about, we have questions about like Squirrel Girl and Fantastic Four. We have questions about NFTs and Web3. We have questions about book lending, and someone asking about the inner life of Utahraptor. So take your pick, Ryan.
Okay, lightning round. Gosh, Fantastic Four and Squirrel. What was the question about Fantastic Four and Squirrel Girl?
Okay, great. So it was, I think you may have partially answered this before, but anyway, how do you sell projects like Squirrel Girl or the Fantastic Four to people who feel like pop culture is oversaturated with superheroes? What do you think your take on these stories offer to people who aren't necessarily traditional comic book fans or super jazzed about the latest superhero movie?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the thing I always keep in mind that you maybe don't get from superhero movies is that superhero comics go all sorts of different places. Superhero movies tend to be, I don't want to say samey, but they're almost a micro genre in themselves. You often have heroes fighting a bad guy that has their same powers. There's sometimes a sky beam. Like there's a lot of beats we've all seen before, but superhero comics go in all sorts of crazy directions. Squirrel Girl is about a young woman who tries to fight crime with the power of empathy, basically understanding her villains, trying to help them. Fantastic Four are more science adventurers. They're not the ones stopping bank robberies. They're the ones traveling into a small town where they realize everyone is a robot and what's going on here. Why were these robots built? Like they're sci-fi, almost TOS Star Trek episodes. The way I'm writing them is little mini adventures where 4 weirdos come into town, find a problem, help solve the problem, and then go on to their next adventure. So I would almost say, like, don't look to the movies for what the comics are, but pick up a couple titles that interest you and see the breadth and depth of what you can do. Because really the genre is just what if cool stories plus people aren't limited to human frailties. What if you could punch through a wall and, you know, do Heart of Darkness or any sort of literature? What was the next one? Web3 NFTs?
Yeah, okay, so let me find that question. You have come out strongly against the idea of NFTs, Web3, crypto. What is the wildest, most tone-deaf pitch that you've gotten from that crowd?
Oh, wow. I don't think I've been pitched anything personally, because I have been the guy being like, this doesn't make sense. What are we doing here? I don't understand how anyone would see this as in any way sustainable. I think the thing I always keep in mind is that always look at the person pitching you on something, what they have to gain. Like when someone is pitching you on NFTs, if they're selling NFTs, if they own NFTs, then they financially benefit from you buying in because now you're the one holding the bag and not them. And I just saw someone in the chat, and one of the things early on, I was pitched on, like, at that time when people in memes were like the kid with the house burned down the background, or like Scumbag Steve were selling NFTs of their meme images. Dinosaur Comics would have fit that great. It's one image. I could sell the template and make, I don't know how much money, hundreds of thousands of dollars. But like, no, I don't want to do that because it's bad, and eventually you're going to be ripping someone off. Someone has to be left holding that bag. And one of the things I've learned in my 42 years on this earth is that just because something is possible doesn't mean it's good. And there will always be someone willing to do something that you're not willing to do. So the fact that other people are doing it doesn't necessarily mean that it is a good thing. And those sound really basic, but it's something I learned a lot during Project Wonderful, was that, like, we're an ad network that's not willing to sell out our users, not willing to put pop-unders and pop-ups and all this stuff on people's sites. And we would be questioned all the time by advertisers being like, why won't you do this? And we're like, well, we don't want to. We're not gonna take ads for your pyramid scheme either. And people get mad. They would get really mad. And I remember one time this woman who was trying to advertise a pyramid scheme got shut down by us, and she just forwarded our emails to the person upstream of her in the pyramid scheme. And we'd be like, this is a pyramid scheme. And he'd be like, well, no, it's not. It's a reverse funnel. And we'd be like, well, a funnel upside down is a pyramid shape. This is a pyramid. And it ended with me saying, look, we are losing money by not taking your advertising. This is costing us. The person who's telling you everything is great is profiting from your involvement in this. So hopefully that gives you some idea over what our motivations are and maybe who you can trust. But it's really hard to reach people when they're invested in a scam like that, where the whole culture around it is you need to try. And if you try, the system works. So if the system's not working, you're not trying hard enough. Invest more, invest more, invest more. And in the end, I suppose it's not a surprise. I got a question about NFTs, how to be talking about pyramid schemes, but that same culture where, like, we're all going to get rich, just believe, it hurts people. And I don't like to see that happen.
Yeah. Wasn't there a question about the inner life of Utah Raptor?
Yeah.
Inner life of Utah Raptor.
It's we have two questions. So one of them is, can you tell us anything about the mysterious inner lives of Utah Raptor or Dromisio mimus?
Mimus.
Sorry if I'm saying that wrong.
That's really good for first try. Mysterious Inner Lives of Utah Raptor and Dromisio mimus. They're the characters from Dinosaur Comics. Randy Monroe, XKCD, did a comic early on, a parody of Dinosaur Comics, where he was saying that they represent schisms in the author's head. And, he may be right. We haven't spoken about it since when we've hung out, but for me, Utah Raptor is part me, part my friend Pat. He's very sensible, very dry, smart. Dromisio mimus, I think, is even smarter because he tends to stay out of it most of the time. Yeah, I think their inner lives should stay pretty mysterious, but also in 20 years of comics, hopefully it's pretty clear about what they think about things.
More questions?
And yes, we had a question about any thoughts about Hoopla and other ebook lending projects?
I'm not super, pardon me. I'm not super familiar with Hoopla, but I mean, I'm a guy from 2003 internet where this is something that you put online for free to be shared. I'm also a guy who has books published through traditional publishers where they do put DRM on their books and they don't want them to be shared. And, end of the day, I feel like if you can display it, you can copy it, and any sort of DRM delays it only briefly until it's shared somewhere. And I don't think that everyone who is reading a pirated version of your work is a lost sale. Like, there are people who are just reading it because it's free. And some of those people convert and say, you know what, I like this. I'm going to buy the next one. I tried it before I buy it. It's a shareware thing. So for things like ebook lending, I'm largely on the side of I don't super see the harm in sharing it. But I've also been asked questions. I remember I was asked a question on Twitter about Fantastic Four. Someone had a question about a panel, and they copied the panel from a comic piracy site with the logo of like, read your pirated comics here at the bottom. And I was like, man, this just feels tacky. Like, I'm happy to answer your question, but just like, don't keep the pirate banner at the bottom. Just cut that off, and then we can all pretend like this is super above board, and we don't have to get into the mire of who's a real reader, blah, 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 blah. Is that that might not be a satisfying answer, but it's the one I got. I like them. That's a short version.
Do we have any more questions?
I did notice a question that.
Oh, Hoopa's to the public
came
library.
earlier.
Hoopa's great.
Ah.
Yes, love it. There's no issues there. It's not even piracy, it's just sharing logins. Love it. Great. No issues. Hoopa is ever. I love libraries. The end.
I'm going to read a question about someone who asked about time traveling. I liked how to invent everything, but reinventing civilization seems like a lot of work. What's the single best invention for the lazy lost time traveler who just wants to get rich? That question's from Mark.
That's a great question, and I have the answer for you. It depends on where you're at, obviously, but if you're anywhere before 1,500 years ago. All right, short history lesson. There are these things called anatomically modern humans, which are humans who look like us based on their remains. Their skeletons are the same. As near as we can tell, they have the exact same bodies as us, and they show up about 200,000 years ago. And then you have this thing called behaviorally modern humans. These were humans start behaving like us. They're burying their dead, they're making art, they're decorating their bodies, and they show up around 50,000 years ago. And the question is, well, what turned us from anatomically modern humans to behaviorally modern humans? Because the skeletons are the same. So is there something in the brain that evolved, or some part that doesn't fossilize that changed, that gave us this sort of great leap forward? And we don't know, but one of the theories, the one I really like, is the idea that we started talking to each other. We invented language. And there's two parts of language, writing and speaking. And speaking is great, lets you have ideas survive the death of the host, but when you write them down, you have ideas that can survive the death of the host, the death of everyone you've ever spoken to, the death of your whole civilization. When we deciphered ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, that was an example of ideas surviving that long through writing. And they're really, these two inventions of oral communication and written communication are really the foundation on where civilization happens. So if you wanted to have the biggest effect on history, you go back to 200,000 years ago to those anatomically modern humans, and you teach them to talk, teach them to communicate, and to write their thoughts down. And you'll be giving every civilization on the planet a 150,000 year head start, which is phenomenal. So in terms of profit, I don't think you can put a number on that, but it's got to be among the most profitable things that could ever happen in human history. And that's my pitch for what you can do.
Sounds like a good premise for a book, actually.
That's why I wrote it.
Yeah. Let's see what else. There's not a lot of time left. I think we have one question. How do you display your many impressive awards?
Oh gosh. I do have a couple of awards. It's funny because there's no physical awards for webcomics. So I was uh, 15, 16 years into dinosaur comics, and my brother is a brewer, and he's won awards for his brewing at this huge shelf of just all these medals for making beer. And I was like, man, I've never won an award. So he gave me that award, one of his awards, one of his many awards. So now I have a couple Harvey Awards, a couple Eisner Awards, and a brewing award, Stolen Valor for beer I did not make. And I had them on a shelf just to, you know, they're nice to look at. But at the start of pandemic, I did a video call at my kitchen table with the shelf accidentally in frame behind me, right behind my head. And it, without intending to, look like the most egotistical, intentional thing in the world to be like, oh, hello, I'm just standing in front of my many awards. Perhaps you've noticed them. So I no longer take calls in that position. It's too embarrassing for people to know that I won a prize for writing. More than one.
Yeah, I remember, this is an aside, but it's one I feel strong about. MetaFilter member 112 Foop. Hasn't been seen for a couple of years, sadly. We don't know what happened to him, but one of his stories he told, he has a blank Oscar.
Oh, wow.
Without the name. Yeah, it's given to him like former co-workers. He mentioned that a couple of times. I wonder what happened to that. Yeah.
Probably someone put their name on it. I would.
Got another question. Squirrel Girl, the delightful property of being charming without tipping into saccharine/cringe. How do you strike that balance in your work?
Good question. Part of it is you are your own first and best reader. So I have a concept, I'm sure I didn't invent it, called the suck fairy, where you write something and you go to bed, and overnight the suck fairy comes and makes what you wrote suck. And then you read it the next morning and you're like, oh no, the suck fairy ruined my writing. So I always try to sleep on something and reread it. And then anything I bump against, I try to shave those edges off, try to make it read smoothly. With Squirrel Girl in particular, the thing with her is that I decided she's going to be a clever young woman studying computer science at Marvel University, ESU, Empire State University. And because she's a clever young woman, that means she's going to approach solutions and approach problems and solve them in clever ways. And punching's not going to be her first stop necessarily. Like, I'm sure, John, when you have conflicts, you probably discuss them more. You probably get into more discussions than you do fistfights. And yes. I'm the same way, but in a superhero comic, usually it's fistfights first and then discussions. And so Doreen Squirrel Girl wouldn't do that because she's smart enough not to do that. And in the real world, that's normal. In a superhero context, it felt a bit more revolutionary. Like, this is a breath of fresh air. This is not the average superhero. All that stuff helped make her kind of sweet and sensible, but not Pollyanna-ish. Like, she's not naive. She's just clever. And I think that distinction, that you can be clever and smart, and that leads you to kindness, but it doesn't lead you to being naive. It can sometimes be a tightrope, but I mean, that's something I believe. I think the smartest people I know are the kindest, and the people who are unkind might think they're smart. They don't seem to act it. So that's the secret, I guess, is just try to be the best version of yourself. And you have the advantage of a writer that you can spend a couple days thinking, what's the right thing to say here? What's the right thing to do here? And then the character does it in a split second. And that is a great trick to writing characters who are smarter than you, is you give yourself all day to figure it out, and they do it between panels.
Yeah. First, I'd like to say the Suck Fairy, close personal friend of mine. She visits most of the things that I do. Second, one of the nice things about talking with you when you're in your car like this is that the world behind you getting darker as the sun goes down.
Yeah, I turned on a flashlight to give me some light. Otherwise, I'd be in complete darkness. I'm sure I just look very dramatic. This is how I like to do all my calls. From a car with a single LED lighting me. Just gorgeous.
Yeah, we are. we are at about the end of time right here. If there's anything else people want to talk about, though, I mean, I have no objection with going a little over. But I think we're out of questions, aren't we?
Well, if anyone wants to, email me a question privately, my email's on Dinosaur Comics is on my personal site at ryannorth.ca, and I'd be happy to answer a question that is too embarrassing to ask in public.
Yeah, I have a backup question I didn't get to. I was going to ask about the skate park incident with the dog.
Oh,
But
Chelsea, yeah.
yeah, you've probably been asked that a ton, though. So
I mean, it's a fun story. I was walking Chomsky, went into this skate bowl. It was wet. We got stuck, and I want to take a picture of him. And I got my picture, and then I found I couldn't get out with Chomsky because I would just slide back into the bowl. And after about 10 minutes of walking around the pool, being like, "There's no way I'm stuck in here." I posted on Twitter, being like, hypothetically, if we'd gone down to this empty skate bowl, this hole, this pool, dried out pool, and couldn't get out, what should we do? And over the course of like 50 minutes, people helped me combine items in my inventory like it was an adventure game to get out, and we managed to get out. We're using the umbrella on the leash to extend the leash, and then supporting Chomsky by his harness, so we all got out. And I had a fun time. It was a great day on Twitter, and I got home, and the Guardian had a story about it. So suddenly, me getting stuck in a hole is international news. And the Guardian ran a stock photo of like a very shallow splash pad for what they had. And so all these friggin' hole experts came out in the comments and like, I would simply walk 2 paces to the left, and that's how I would escape the hole. So I was thrilled to be eviscerated in the comment section of the Guardian. And my wife got home, and I was like, "How was your day?" And she was like, "Fine. Why are you acting so weird?" I'm like, "I got stuck in a hole," and it's in the Guardian. Had a great time. And she's like, "Why didn't you call the cops?" Like, well, A, that's admitting defeat. The fire department, like, that'd be admitting defeat. And B, they have better things to do. And C, you'd be home in 4 hours. Like, I would much rather have you rescue me from this hole and Chomsky than, have to get the media involved. And then amazingly, a couple of weeks later, this kid in, I think, Poland did the exact same thing without a dog, got stuck in the skate bowl, and called the fire department. And there was this story making fun of this kid who, with a shot of him like in the hole, and the fire department outside the hole looking in on him. And I was like, man, I've been there. It's easier than you think. We should have sympathy for people who get stuck in holes. And the funny thing is, I realized afterwards, like, anyone can get stuck in a hole once, but if I do it again, like, now it's like, what's wrong with Ryan? Like, this is a Ryan problem, not a humanity problem. So I burned my get out of a hole free card. I can never do it again.
Okay. Thank you for that story.
Great note to end on. Bye, everyone.